Sushant, Sareen, usually on foreign affairs in India, there is bipartisan support amongst citizens, whether it's on the issue of Pakistan, China, the United States, even Khalistan. I remember that because we had one PSC on Khalistan recently. This time, though, massive divide among those who vote for the NDA and those who vote for the opposition on different aspects of the Israel-Palestine issue. How is this, in your view, likely to play politically?
Look, if the numbers are anything to go by, again, I'll come back to how Yashwant has picked up his sample sizes. Has he picked up equal numbers of people from both the NDA, UPA? Because if it's just a random kind of a thing, and then he has sought their opinions. Then it very clearly shows me that there is an overwhelming support in sheer numbers for the Israeli position. It's very, very clear. And there is an overwhelming abhorrence of terrorism.
So can I just respond to say that no, it's not 50-50. So basically you're randomly calling people on the phone.
It's a complete random sample. Sushant, it's a complete random sample. In fact, the All India complete randomization ensured that there is approximately 40% NDA supporters in that, and there are 60% opposition supporters in that.
In which case, if that is what Yashwant, your sample is all about, there were 60% people from the opposition and 40% from the ruling coalition, then I think these numbers should really scare the opposition, because it means that the public opinion is not exactly in their favor or the positions they have taken. That is prima facie, I think that is what I can say when I look at these numbers. But you look at the kind of overwhelming support that Israel seems to be getting. When you ask people whether you support Palestine, it's evenly divided. You know, there are 30% odd who support it, 30% who oppose it, 30% who don't know. When you ask whether you support Israel, there is a overwhelmingly, I think it's over 50% who support Israel, only about 20% or something, or 23% who are supporting Palestine. And it just shows you the kind of divide, the way people feel about what has happened. And quite frankly, I think for politicians, I think they need to look at this data very, very carefully, because it has import both for the kind of policies they will make domestically, as well as for some of the foreign policy initiatives.
Let's build on what Sushant is saying. How do these stark differences play out from the perspective of the Ministry of External Affairs? They have to do what they have to do. But now, with this poll, you have a sense of how voters and citizens are viewing the issue of Hamas and Israel and this conflict. How is this likely to play out in the realm of diplomacy?
I think that the figures that have been put together by Mr. Yashwant Deshmukh fully support the policy that the Ministry of External Affairs has been saying, because I think the two most outstanding facts are, number one, almost unanimous condemnation for acts of terror. That's number one. And number two, the feeling that those who are supporting acts of terror, supporting the Hamas attack on Israel, are doing it for appeasement purposes and not for any. So the overwhelming opinion of the public is against acts of terror. I think that's a very important point that was reflected in Prime Minister Modi's first statement, because this is very important for India, for within India. We don't want any, whether it's the Khalistanis, whether it is supporters of Hamas, we don't want acts of terror within India, whether it's elections or non-elections. We want a peaceful situation. We want dialogue and diplomacy and an end to the era of war. So I think that this is a support of the foreign policy.
It's interesting that you mention the era of war, because the Prime Minister said this isn't an era of war. We've had the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we have Armenia and Azerbaijan fight again. Now Hamas and Israel duking it out, and that the fear that this could expand further to include Lebanon, Syria, and who else, and therefore this clearly does seem to be, unfortunately, an era of war, far from not being an era of war. Last question, impact of this war on India's relations with Arab countries. Let's take you through the responses. 24% of the overall respondents say this will lead to a deterioration of India's relations with Arab world. 12% say it'll become stronger. That's a bit bizarre. 12% think it'll become stronger. I don't know how that works out, but that's what they think. More importantly, 47% say the relationship that India has with Arab nations will stay the same. 57% of them said they voted for the NDA. Now, this is reassuring, Shehzad Poonawalla, from the government's perspective, that despite what's happened between Hamas and Israel, 47% of overall respondents think India's relationship with the Arab world, and we've seen how much the Prime Minister has invested in his government's equity in building the relationship with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, even Egypt. That is incredible, and people think that this war and the position India has taken doesn't impact that.
In fact, if you add 47 and 12%, 59 or almost 6 out of 10 people think that our relationships will only get stronger. And there's a reason for that. Rahul, our investment in the West Asian area, or in the Middle East, as others would call it, is based on certain amount of exchanges of our deep roots, deep connections, and it is not based on support for a terrorist act or condemnation of a terrorist act. By the way, let me tell you, if you go to question number 5, more Congress supporters or Indi supporters are saying they will support Israel, 34%, than Palestine. Therefore, I'm saying, and let me also say one more issue. I'm an Indian Muslim. Rahul, I'll ask you, please ask Yashwant to do a survey. 9 out of 10 Indian Muslims won't be able to point out where Palestine is on the map of the world. They don't know anything about this. But this Congress party and they think that by supporting Hamas, by not condemning their actions of terror, they are going to appease a bunch of voters here and they are going to do justice to the Palestinian cause. None of this is actually going to give them any benefit, even amongst their own supporters. And as far as our relationships with West Asian countries is concerned, it is based on what we have done with them. It is based on certain amount of our exchanges and principles that we stand by. And therefore, I don't think that this will, in the long term, have any effect on our relationship with the Arab nations.